Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another amazing episode of the Stephen Jarvis and Friends podcast. With me today is a TikTok podcaster, also a true crime one, and she is the host of the Crime Cakes, hopefully I said that right, podcast on TikTok. Go check her out. You'll never regret that decision to go check out her channel on TikTok. Great person. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and we are actually crime scene and cupcakes, but we switched it down to crime cakes to make it easier for everybody to understand. And yeah, we also have a podcast where we discuss a lot of unsolved cases within the area. So really hope we can raise awareness and get a lot of people's attention on these cases and hopefully get some answers.
Yeah. So, which cases have you been working on so far, and which ones have you actually had the most luck with doing?
The whole reason I actually ended up getting this started is my best friend was murdered a little over 30 years ago, and her killer still hasn't been found or brought to justice. And one of my biggest frustrations is there was never any activity on her case. No one was bringing awareness. Nobody was doing anything. And there really, truly wasn't any advocates for her. And it just frustrated me. And, you want to leave it in law enforcement's hands as long as you can. But it got to a point where I just became so frustrated that I became very active and very vocal in her case. And now this last couple of years, her case has really started picking up. Her case has been showcased on the local news here several times. Her case is featured on a site called uncovered.com. And so I'm hoping we're getting closer to getting some answers on that case. So I'm really excited about that one. Another case that just has been plaguing me, and it's been a year now, is a young man named Fasika Tadell. His father reached out to me. He was driving from Orlando, Florida to Wichita, Kansas to visit his family here, but got into a car accident in Missouri. And a tow truck driver ended up picking him up, and then instead of dropping him off at a gas station in town, dropped him off at a gas station in the middle of nowhere without his phone, his belongings, anything, and he was never seen again. And It's been a year now, and his father still has had no word, no activity. And so we have been working a lot on that case as well. So those, I have so many cases, but those are two that we've been working diligently on just every day. I pick those two cases up. So
yeah. What got you into doing true crime?
I'm actually a retired criminologist, and so I've 20 years of working in this field. I'm also a cadaver dog handler and trainer, so I work closely within doing that as well. So I'm not somebody who just recently became fascinated with true crime and wanted to, go down these rabbit holes. True crime has been a large portion of my life for ever since I can remember. It's always been something that was ingrained, and I wanted to focus all of my college experience on that, and I did. And then, I spent 20 years working in the field, and then I love working with dogs. Dogs have such an amazing ability to find things that nobody else can. And so I have a very large pack of dogs, and which you will see on our TikTok channel quite a bit. And yeah, so I work with those dogs quite a bit, and we do our best to try to locate the remains of those that have been missing.
So with that, has there been any hiccups with, like, when you talk to law enforcement about some of these cases, or has it been smooth sailing? You know, they're more than supportive of what you're trying to do, trying to get it, you know, try to see it from an unbiased lens, to be honest.
I am so glad you brought that up, and you're actually the first person to ever ask that question. And it actually is not ever smooth sailing. It is most usually and most generally a really difficult, you would think, a lot of people assume because of my background that it is a really easy thing to work with, and it actually makes things harder for me. Because I think people assume I want to come in and take over a case, and I don't. I want to, it is completely their cases, their jobs. All I want to do is spread the awareness. I want to get those victims' names out in and on social media. That's my job. That's how I see it anymore. I am retired. That's all I do. And then I want to help with the dog aspect. That's all I want to do. But yeah, you're the first person who really identified that it's probably made my life much more difficult. There are a couple local police departments who see me as a great resource, and they will send cases my way. But considering how big we are in this local area, it's very few and far between. And especially in my friend's case, the local police department here will not allow me within any area. They will not share any type of information on her case with me at all.
Well, because in their mind, it's like, well, we got this person's friend that's coming out saying, hey, you know, can I help you? Can I get it out there and all that? They think it's God, what's the word for it? Can't even remember the word, but I know what you're talking about. They think it's where you wouldn't be doing it for the right reasons when in fact you are. You know, you're not trying to just, you know, screw up the case. You're trying to get it out there so that if anyone does know about what happened to your friend, you know, it happens, you know, an unbiased opinion. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, that is exactly it. And that's something we try to drive home, or I try to drive home on my podcast, is, you know, any funds we make from ads or anything on our podcast, we feed back into, we donate our resources to an organization called Jordan Detection Canine, where they are training dogs to find child pornography. Their dogs are actually able to locate the hard drive, the little flash drives. And they have actually, they worked on the Jared Subway case. They worked on the Olympic coach case. So we donate our funds to that. We're also using the funds to get a billboard for missing persons here in Kansas. So we don't keep any of the funds that we make. Everything, because that is not our purpose. That is not what we want. So
you're
all it is awareness. Yes.
Yeah.
We are just completely. Yeah. And I often, one of the things I get asked a lot is, oh my gosh, you know, you're true crime, but your TikTok also has a lot of funny things with your dogs. And one thing I want to reach out to people is too much true crime is not healthy. And so I always try to intersperse a little bit of that with, you've got to find your humor. You've got to find that. So I am not one of those TikToks where you're going to get nothing but cases all the time. I want you to see some of the light and some of the happy that goes on in the world as well.
Well, definitely. I mean, you are the second kind of true crime podcast I interviewed. The first was the Deep Dark Secrets podcast, where they delve into the death fetish community
Oh,
and
yes.
are trying to bring it to light and to show people that, hey, there are these sick individuals that enjoy this shit, And then, not that I interviewed him, but I had him on the show, and God, why can't I remember his name now? But anyway, he was on the Broken System podcast. Robert Palmer, from the Broken System podcast. He just was dealing with a cold case in the they at first listed it as suicide, and the guy's name was DJ Ficky. Well, they just now considered it a homicide, and the guy that did it is now awaiting trial. So now it's been like DJ's family is able to, have their mourning process and grieve and be happy that they finally got his killer. So hopefully something good comes out of it, with the trial and all that. But yeah, if you haven't checked that out, go check that out on Spotify.
I have not. I'm going to check that one out. Definitely. I've missed that one.
Robert has had the same issue with you with police. He's been, and he said the same thing. I'm not going to have a biased opinion. I'll let you guys come on the show and talk about it. And they just keep telling them no because they feel like he's going to crap all over their job as law enforcement. And he doesn't. In his show, he shows that, they did kind of mess up, which none of the police departments are ever perfect.
Right.
But at the same time, with the way they handled it, they just thought DJ had committed suicide and that they demonized DJ from the start. They never treated him like he was a human being. And so then finally when Robert started doing the podcast, he kind of wanted to tell people DJ's story to say, hey, this police department should understand that DJ is a human being. Yeah, he had problems in his life, but you know what? He's still a human being. He's made mistakes. Nobody's perfect. We all try to be, but we're not. At least I'm not. My mother-in-law always says she is, but I'm never perfect, so... And yeah,
well,
Mark has it right with saying that, it's an awesome podcast and he breaks everything down. And that's the thing with a lot of... Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
That's a lot of things with certain true crime podcasts is they do break it down and make it simple. And then there's other ones that make it like it's just goes right over your head, and to get people that can kind of break it down and to bring people in slowly with what they're trying to do, greatest thing in the world.
Well, and I try to show both worlds. I have been of both worlds. And that's my thing is I can definitely show that law enforcement makes mistakes.
Oh,
and all we have to do is honestly own them and bring in a fresh set of eyes. And that's all I'm petitioning for is we have had the same person working cold cases for over 20 years. Maybe it's time to have somebody new look at these cases. And we have over 200 cold cases here. Let's have somebody take a look at them and get some new information. And I think we could maybe make a change. That's all I'm suggesting. And
well, not only that, a fresh set of eyes now, but also ones that, have understand the new policies that have come in. I mean, heck, they're still over in San Francisco. They're still trying to figure out who the Zodiac killer is. And they finally found out a couple years ago who the Golden State Killer was. And it's just like, you know, some of these people that have been in it for too long, they're still stuck with the policies that they had before, rather than, you know, allowing someone that may be a newer eyes, like you were saying on the prize, look at the case and be like, hey, you know, maybe you missed something here.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually had a case here in the Great Bend area where a nurse had been murdered, and it was back in the 80s. And what had ended up, they hadn't been able to find her murderer. And then a detective had ended up coming down with COVID and took her case files. And while he was too sick to be in contact with anybody, he took her case file and started going through it. He found a note that actually solved the whole case that the detectives and everybody had the whole time. They all just missed it. And it's just so frustrating to think, how many cases do we have that are sitting there like that? So...
Well, I mean, even some of the solved cases, like the Adam Walsh case, you know, it took them so long to say that, you know, Otis Toole, who had admitted to it, recanted many times, to finally just say, well, you know, hey, he was the first one to admit it, we'll deal with it. And I don't think John Walsh ever did believe that Otis Toole was the one to do it. And granted, there was the conspiracy theories that Jeffrey Dahmer did it because Dahmer was down there at the same time in Florida at the same time of the kidnapping. And it's just, you're always going to have shit like that. I mean, it's ridiculous. Heck, there's people that think that Jack the Ripper did the Zodiac killings.
Oh, I've missed that one.
Oh yeah, there's literally people that say, "Oh, it must have been Jack the Ripper." It's like Jack the Ripper's been dead even long before then.
So he's a vampire of some sort. All right.
Hey, you never know. You never know. We're finding more shit out every day about stuff. Like we're finding out now about aliens, even though we all knew about them.
That's right. Exactly. It's like, this is not new. This is old information. But, all right.
Well, of course, Mark, that John Walsh is going to say Otis was the killer of Adam. They probably told them after a while that, hey, we're satisfied with it. Leave it alone. I mean, John Walsh and them, John Walsh always did say that he was the killer. It's just that he kept recanting, and the car that Adam was supposedly murdered in was, they took it to a car wash, washed everything, and then sold it at a police auction before they got anything. And John Walsh did talk about that part. He said, how can you take a person of interest car, barely have it in your impound for, I think it was like he said, a couple of months, and be satisfied with what you may or may not have found? And now they think Otis didn't do it alone, and it's just, it's a frustrating case. And granted, nowadays, that Code Adam, you have Amber Alerts, you have all these other different things in place now. Some of them still work, others are kind of outdated in a way, but, you know, it's sickening that even back then, we couldn't get everything figured out. And we still can't to this day. Like you said, you over there, they have many cold cases that haven't been solved yet. And it's just... Yeah,
we have so many. And I know we have cases happening every day, but families are still waiting on these cases. These families haven't had answers. So it just breaks my heart. And another question I always get is, well, where do you get your cases? And it's like, I have families reaching out to me almost on a daily basis, asking me to, can you, give attention to our case. And it started with just Kansas, and now we've got Missouri, Oklahoma, and now most of Texas of just people reaching out for help. So it's
Texas
sad.
would definitely be one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Oh, don't get me started on Texas. Oh.
Did they give you the Phantom Killer one yet?
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah.
What is the Phantom Killer?
Have you ever watched the movie The Town That Dreaded Sundown?
Yes. Yes.
That's the Phantom Killer. And they never caught the guy. This was a little bit after, I think, World War I, World War II, when this started happening. And it was the reason they called them the Texarkana Moonlight Murders was because it happened right on the border between Arkansas and Texas, I think. Or is that, hold on one second, I gotta relook that one up, because my dad was born in the late 50s, so he had seen all these horror movies like that and all that, so he's like, yeah, you need to watch that once. And I watched it and I was like, wow. And it's on YouTube now, so like everything.
Yeah.
Let's see. Phantom Killer. Yeah, so it was on the border of Arkansas and Texas, where most of these were happening. Wow. And they still haven't identified the killer.
Yeah, I thought I remember that being based on a true story, but yeah, I didn't know the name, and oh my gosh, that's crazy. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, and Mark brings up another good point. Without DNA, how can you find someone innocent or not innocent? Well, here's the thing, Mark. When Adam Walsh's killer was captured, they had the vehicle. And even John Walsh will go to his last breath one day saying that, they didn't do their due diligence. And granted, yeah, back in the day, DNA isn't like it is today. Hell, they might have caught the Zodiac Killer back then. They might have caught a lot of the killers that went kind of unnoticed a lot sooner back then. I mean, heck, the reason they got John Wayne Gacy was because they were in his house and one of the cops wanted to go, I think, to the bathroom because he could smell a foul odor in the house and happened upon it. Same thing with Dahmer. I mean, the guy said, well, can I go? I need the handcuffs to this person that you were just almost trying to murder, but they escaped. And he's like, oh, yeah, it's in the bedroom. Well, the cop's looking through everything and sees all these pictures and all that. And so that's how Dahmer was caught. I mean, Gein, he was caught because someone came into the general store that he had just done his last murder at, saw blood, and then they said, well, Ed Gein was in here yesterday, so maybe he came in today and did this, so that's how he was caught. Most of our greatest killers were caught by luck, circumstance, and I mean, even today, a lot of it is luck, and going back through the case files and finding different things that weren't brought to light back then. So it's definitely weird.
And I've noticed what seems to be happening a little bit more now is family members of the person who committed the crime or friends are coming forward and saying, this person did tell me about this. This person did talk to me about this. Those types of things are at least a jumping off point for law enforcement to be able to go back to the evidence and come back and then put the rest of the pieces of the puzzle together. And one of the things I keep hoping for are nursing home confessions, at least in some of these older cases, or getting anybody and everybody, just somebody to know and to listen, that if you are talking, just talk to somebody in the right place. You just come forward and say something. And if you think that nobody's going to listen to you, we actually have. I mean, there was a lot of things.
Definitely.
We had one case where somebody had just called, and they had called and said something about hey, this was a weird color of a shirt that happened in this crowd that we were at. And we were able to go back through on enough stuff just by them identifying on a color of a shirt. It took us a little while, but we were able to go through and actually catch a child killer because of that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
any tip that somebody calls in can be helpful.
Well, yeah, and if they don't deem it helpful, at least they do their due diligence to figure that out.
Exactly.
I mean, heck, the Cropsey murders that happened in New York with the kids from these kids that were, and back then, you know, mentally handicapped kids were either put in Willowbrook or another, what they deemed, God, they had a special name for them, but they weren't considered institutions or anything like that. They were considered schools for the mentally disabled, I think is what we should probably call them. But they weren't good schools. A lot of them were underfunded, and the people weren't taken care of. And so when the Willowbrook stuff started happening, they later, they don't know if it's truly the guy that they got, but they kind of figured that he was one of them. And supposedly they had one theory that there was like a big, huge group of these people kidnapping mentally handicapped children and murdering them. And that it never really, they do have someone in custody, but it never really got satisfied with the people around that area. Just like the Son of Sam killings, now supposedly they think it was a cult because David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam, said that it was. So it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, there are always those theory rabbit holes to go down to. So, yeah.
If you were able to work on any cold case presently or in the past, which ones would you want to work on?
Well, besides my friend's murder, of course. Yeah. Let's see. That's a really good question. And I had an answer, and then, of course, it just kind of disappears. The Fager family murders here in Kansas. And I don't know if anybody's heard of that.
No.
But it was, oh my gosh, this case haunts my dreams. It is this case that happened in the 80s. And this wife comes home after she's been out of town for a few days after Christmas, and walks in the door and finds her husband shot and her two daughters drowned in the hot tub with electrical tape. It's an insane case. And the handyman who had been working on the area had taken the family car, and nobody knew where he was. They end up finding him in Florida. He had changed his clothes and stuff, and then ends up calling his wife a few days later. She contacts the police. I'm just giving you a really brief version.
Yeah.
So the police bring him back. He ends up going to trial, but he says he has amnesia. He cannot remember anything that happens.
Yeah.
There is CCTV showing him shopping at like a Sears, and he even ends up talking to like a retired police chief or something at one point, when possibly the murders might have happened. And his work van is found at a McDonald's that's nearby in the neighborhood. But this whole amnesia thing is crazy. So all of this goes through. He ends up getting found not guilty. And the jury foreman, it gets better. So the jury foreman says, well, he's not guilty. And if anybody thinks he did it, he did it. If he did it, it's because there was the devil involved. And he may have been possessed by Satan, and that's why he lost his memory. And then all over Wichita, Kansas, this jury foreman, who's supposed to be unbiased and impartial, created these pamphlets called The Dark and Light of Bill Butterworth, who was the name of the handyman, and trying to convert all of these people to religion because of this. So this guy has been out there living his life, and they found the girls that have been assaulted in the bad way, on top of being murdered, and all of this stuff. I mean, the trial is, and I did a podcast on this. The case makes me insane because, as far as I'm concerned, a killer walked free. I don't quite know how he did. And the craziest thing, too, is BTK, before he was caught, he was still doing his crimes at the time. He writes a letter, and they were able to confirm the letter was from BTK. He writes a letter to the victim's wife and says, hey, I didn't do this, but I think that guy did an amazing job. I'm really impressed with what he did, but hey, this crime's not mine. This one wasn't mine, but this guy did. And it's just, yes, that I would work that case in a second. That case was just, I think the police did an excellent job. I don't know. I think prosecution blew that case. So,
well, I mean, that's kind of like the How to Catch or How to Make a Murderer Netflix thing about Stephen Avery over in Wisconsin.
Yes.
You know, they had him in prison before on a bogus charge, and the lady even said it wasn't him. But then, of course, you know, they're like, no, this is the guy. And then, of course, he gets out. Well, then he goes to sue them. And then, of course, now he's still in prison. But, yeah, it's definitely weird how some of this stuff goes on. And even Teresa Hallback's family does not believe he did it. Because, I mean, there was so much circumstantial stuff. Like, they're like, well, there was dried blood in the sink. And it's like, well, he had cut himself and was washing his hand off. And so they immediately said, well, we were able to get his DNA, and it was in the vehicle that she had. And it's like, okay, well, tell me this then. So you're looking for this woman, and magically it ends up on the Avery family's junkyard or mechanic shop, whatever it is. Don't you maybe think it might have been planted? Because, I mean, you're telling everyone, hey, we're looking for this woman that's disappeared. She had shown up there and took pictures of a listing, I think it was, and then left. Well, then all of a sudden someone else is following her, and they thought it was Stephen Avery. But now lately, the lawyer that he's got, which she's an amazing lawyer, she has gotten it that maybe it wasn't Stephen Avery, but maybe it was one of his nephews. And a nephew of his is in jail or in prison because he told the police that they had done it, but it was kind of a coercion type deal where the cops were kind of like, hey, if you say you did this, we'll go easy on you. You won't be in trouble. Well, then, of course, was this guy going to say, of course so it's just, And I mean, heck, even if we had true crime podcasts back in the day, maybe Richard Ramirez, the second Night Stalker, wouldn't have been around. Ted Bundy might have not got. I mean, heck, if I could ever watch a podcast, true crime podcast that did their due diligence on the Ted Bundy one, I'd love to have that on the show. How that guy was able to escape not once, but I think twice while he's in custody.
You are speaking to somebody who, my most recent podcast, I am doing a summer series about child-on-child crimes. And it's talking about psychopathy in children.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and when I worked on one of my PhDs is in forensic psychology.
Yep.
And I'm fascinated by Ted Bundy because Ted Bundy as a child had so many red flags that he was going to do. As a child, he would dig holes all around the neighborhood to watch people fall into them and gauge what type of hurt they were going to have.
Yeah.
The mental process that goes into that. So I am throughout this, I am analyzing because I studied a lot of Ted Bundy, the early Bundy growing into what he did, of what he was able to share before he was executed. And Ted Bundy, how he was able to do this, the manipulation he had done is insane. And as I do this, I'm talking about correlations between Ted Bundy and child killer Alyssa Bustamante. And it's just, there are a lot of correlations between her and Ted Bundy. And it just blew my mind that yet again, all these years later, nobody really is able to see that these warning signs are out there to some of these kids are extremely dangerous before they kill somebody else.
And I mean, you even had the ones that did the Slender Man thing where, you know, the kids brought the girl into the woods and they stabbed. Granted, the girl survived, thankfully, but, you know, and that's the thing. I mean, in Atlanta, you had the Atlanta child murders back in the day, and that there's some people, and Robert did a video on that where, you know, a lot of people aren't satisfied that the person they did catch is truly the guy, you know, but I mean, it's and that's kind of what the Mind Hunter series did on Netflix, where it kind of said, well, maybe they didn't have the right guy. He doesn't fit a profile they were trying to make. And then, you know, I mean, even you look at Edmund Kemper, he had killed his grandparents. And then later on, after he's let out, he goes on his killing spree. Well, his final victim is his mother. And so it's just, it's weird. It's weird how a lot of these cases, you know, even with Ted Bundy, honestly got as much as what they could have out of him before he was executed. But at the same time, you know, this guy was able to lie his way to get women to trust him. And I think they probably thought, well, how do we know he's not lying to us? And I think they stopped.
I think he was.
Oh, definitely. I think, and a lot of people do say, you know, pornography and all that does lead to some of it and all that. But I still don't know the killer's mind as well as we should nowadays. And heck, when original Night Stalker, the Golden State Killer, was around, later they find out he's an ex-cop who was doing these killings. So he was able to know how to get into a person's home, how to, you know, response times. They'll never check me jumping over people's backyard fences. So it's just like we as people that are trying to still figure this stuff out still haven't figured out a lot of stuff, because they still go by evidence, which is key to any investigation, but that evidence can be forged. I mean, heck, one of the Hillside Stranglers, while he was in jail, had tried to get a woman to murder someone else and then pour someone's semen on to make it look like it was a different person type thing. And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
definitely weird.
These guys there's something else, let me tell you.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and yet there's women out there that would like to be with them. It's like, good Lord.
That's I don't know who's worse, the guys or the women who sexualize and want to develop a relationship with them.
Well,
It just turns my stomach.
Have you ever noticed there is a pattern with that, and most of those women have mental health issues?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. My thing is, though, if you notice you're doing that, go seek help. We're encouraging you. If you see
definitely.
these red flags within yourself, go get help. Don't go get a serial killer. Go get help.
I still think it's funny how they try and point to people with just mental health issues are, are serial killers in the making. It's like, no, there's other factors, but and that's the thing with me. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression when I was 18 years old. Granted, I kind of felt like I had that a lot longer in my life than what I've been dealing with it now. Heck, I'm 30, so it was probably about 22 years that I've been dealing with this. And of course, people think, well, hey, there's medicine, all that stuff. It works, but it's not the be all end all. There's no cure for it. And now you have some investigators out there that are trying to make that link between mental health issues and serial killers, and it's not sticking. So now they're like, well, now we got to go back to the drawing board and try and figure this out, which I'm not on here saying people with mental health would be capable of doing something like that, because people with mental health, are just trying to live their life with something that, one, they're never going to be able to cure, but they'll have to control it. And on one of the Netflix specials, they tried to say the reason why Ted Bundy did his thing was because he was depressed, because he had found out that his real parents that he was told were his parents were in fact his grandparents, and that his mother was, or his sister was actually his mother. And it's just like,
that's the biggest crock I've ever heard.
I mean, they'll try.
And one of my frustrations is when investigators or media is trying to pigeonhole, when a crime happens that is so hideous that we can't get minds around it, that we immediately say, oh, it's mental health. They've got to have something wrong with their mental health. Like the Chad Foreman case, right out of the gate, everyone is saying it's mental health related. Yeah. And he hasn't even had a chance to have proper mental training. And honestly, I'm just thinking right now, as far as I'm concerned, that's just an evil human being.
Well, that's just like with a lot of the school shootings, like Columbine and all that. They want to point out that, oh, it was mental health and all that. And later on, they're saying, no, these kids were popular. They were, they didn't have anything wrong with them. It's just they decided to do this. And then, of course, if it ain't that, it's because they were able to get guns. Well, they didn't go to any store and buy the guns. They got them from a friend or a cousin of one of the mass shooters, and that's how it started. So it's just the mental health thing. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole thing. And I think whenever something like these school shootings happen, or like what recently happened, with that church shooting just last month, they immediately said it was mental health. And then after that one didn't stick, then it was, well, we need stricter gun laws. Which, as I've always said, I'm not here to talk politics, but it's like, when is it going to be enough time where it's like, maybe we need a new set of looking into why people do this? It's not because they came out as a different gender or whatever. It's not that. It's not just, always mental health. It's not all these other simple explanations. Maybe it's more complex than what they really want to agree with. I mean, heck, with Ted Bundy, they looked at the guy and said, hey, that's a guy I would let my daughter date. And yet the guy was one of the most vile pieces of garbage out there. And I mean, they said the same thing about a lot of those killers. They said, oh, he's a good looking guy. Why? I would have never suspected him. And it's just like, well, maybe because they were that cunning and had that good of a backstory until they screw up and they get caught. I mean, Ted Bundy, with as smart as they claim he was, they even said that, had he not screwed up, he'd probably still be doing it today. And it's like, well, would he, or would he have kind of said, hey, they still haven't caught me yet. Maybe I need to quit doing it before they do. Because that's what evidently or eventually happens. They screw up.
Oh, yeah. Well, and honestly, I mean, in our studies and what we found is, I mean, especially with Ted Bundy, I mean, he continued to escalate. I mean, he had no choice but to get caught because he escalated to a point that he was going to get caught, and he knew he was going to get caught. I mean, he escalated so severe that, well, and the other thing about Ted Bundy's case to me is so many people talk about how cunning he was and stuff, but yet his girlfriend had called the police and turned him in and said, hey, I think this is the killer. He had other people turning him in, and the cops were ignoring this. They brought him in, they talked to him and went, we just don't think this is him.
Yeah. But just based on looks, the eye test, as they call it. And it's just like, really? I mean, his, I think that was, I think her first name was Liz or something. Yeah, she had seen his picture in the paper and said, hey, isn't that Ted? And then called it in. And then, of course, they just, and she had a nervous breakdown after all that and said, had they listened, all these other ones wouldn't have died. Or maybe none of them at all.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he was.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it is what it is, but at the same time, it's like, and of course, none of those cops that when he escaped out of the courthouse ever came by and said, hey, it's our fault.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, this guy, this guy's on trial for murder, but yet you allow him to take a private phone call in the library to where he can, and here's another kicker about it. They were reporting to, and this may just be someone saying that they knew something was up when he was jumping off his bed to try and cushion the blow and all that, or to practice the jump from the courthouse to the ground. And there was one officer that said, oh, yeah, I reported it to the warden. The warden blew me off. And it's just like they had literally asked the guy, well, would you take a lie detector test on this? And he said, well, I would like to plead the Fifth or whatever amendment where he wouldn't have to. And it's just like, wow. But yeah, it's just granted, back when Ted Bundy and all them were doing their thing, you didn't have cooperation between different states' departments.
Right.
So it was it was a crapshoot at best that you would catch them.
Yeah, it was actually, in that case, it's pretty incredible that he was caught as quickly as he was. That actually surprised me. Because that generally would never have happened. That one actually shocked me. But so
Yeah, here in Minnesota, we had a big one. It wasn't really much of a cold case. They would later catch the guy, but the Katie Poyer case. And
oh yeah.
I was actually 6 when that happened. And my parents, before they got divorced, had taken me and my older brother camping. Well, the whole time they're trying to find this woman that got kidnapped out of a gas station back when it was just one person at night working a gas station. We seen the helicopters, and of course they had people that were looking for her saying, hey, have you seen her? Have you seen this guy? His name is Donald Bloom. He's, he has been in jail multiple times, incarcerated multiple times, but let out because he was a multi-time sex offender before he finally killed her. And then now just recently he had passed away, thank God. Although I don't know why they would have ever let that son of a bitch live.
Yeah.
It's scary how, and like I told people have asked me, they're like, well, you had crime podcasts and true crime people on your show. Why didn't you ever want to do that? And I'm like, because that's a lot of evidence you have to look through. And if you get it wrong, you can get sued. And I was like, I think I like talking about horror movies and, all that more than trying to sift through all that. Because, I mean, look at if with the Broken System podcast, look if he got one thing wrong. And the fan, well, granted, DJ's sister, he had interviewed his sister, Amanda, and she's just so thankful that they finally caught the guy that actually did it. And I mean, when you listen to that series, you'll find out right away they always had the guy. It's just the guy knew how to switch the story. Even during the interrogation, he was trying to paint himself as such a great guy and that he was trying to help DJ and DJ's wife. But yet they found out there was a sex triangle going on between the guy that did it and DJ's wife. Because they were drug addicts and this guy was a drug dealer. And like Robert says, DJ may have made mistakes in his life, but he didn't deserve to die.
Right.
And to inhumanize him like they did was just, and of course during the 911 calls, takes 3 911 calls before cops are actually out there, and one of the operators actually told them, could you please move the gun? It's like,
God,
that is
oh my God.
So instead,
oh my God,
DJ is, I think he was dominantly left-handed. Well, he had shot himself. No, I think he was right-handed, and he had shot himself on the left side. And it's just like, well, and then of course they say he shot himself in the mouth, but yet the gun is on his side. And of course they took it as, he committed suicide when there was so many, and Robert even says that during the series they did on it. He's like, there was so many times they could have caught this guy, and they never interviewed them one by one until I think a week or couple days later, so that they could all course the story and get their story straight and all that. And it's just, it was interesting. But thankfully for Robert, he got it right.
I can't wait to watch that.
Well, and I used to talk with my friends on the Zodiac killings and all that, and they always thought that it was someone that escaped jail. And I said, what if it was a cop? And they're like, well, how would that be? Cops are there to defend you. I'm like, well, most cops, yes, but I said there is a select few that are very bad cops. And I said, it wouldn't be hard for a bad cop to figure out the nuances, the response time, and all that. And I mean, the Golden State Killer was an ex-cop. So it's just like, they never look at stuff like that because it's like, they don't want to say, well, yeah, maybe an ex-cop did do the Zodiac killings. I always thought that's the way it was. And now they're trying to use the same stuff, how they got the Golden State Killer to solve the Zodiac killing. And every now and then you'll hear that, oh, they've gotten close to breaking the case, and then it's no. So it's just, it's definitely weird. But.
Yeah. And on the facet of cops, I mean, we had a police officer in one of the area's smaller towns here who, once the new police chief took over, had figured out that we had a serial sexual offender who had been raping women and actually some younger girls. And it turned out to be the local police officer. So he has now been arrested. And so it definitely happens. There are definitely cops and he had been doing this for years, and he was a huge member of his church. He reminds me so much of BTK. I mean, he has the demeanor, he's the family man.
Well, I mean,
and
look at John Wayne Gacy. He went to church and all that. He portrayed the holier than now I'm perfect type person, and it's just like later on they're like, wow, we would have never guessed it. But yet, if they would have ever, which I thought was funny, because once John Wayne was knowing that he was under surveillance, he would literally drag race these people that were supposed to keep a watch on him, and they would find it funny. And it's like, how do you not see this guy as a credible threat? Granted, they had figured he was a person of interest, and that's why they were doing the stakeouts. But then once they finally got in there and, you know, they could smell something wasn't right, and then the one cop goes into the bathroom and all of a sudden, you know, it's just, hey, you know, there's this really weird smell coming from the crawl space. Well, then, you know, they later found out what that was. So it's definitely it's definitely a weird thing. And granted, we did have a cold case, and it was where a lady had gotten, first of all, they couldn't have children. So then they adopted a child, and then they were able to keep the first child. Well, then Dennis Jurgens was the name of the little boy, and the adoptive mother, they said it was like ritualistic, almost satanic type of abuse that she would do to this kid. And they made it a Lifetime movie, made it into a Lifetime movie with Beverly D'Angelo as the mother, who is trying to figure out what happened to the son that she gave up. Because back then, when this happened, if you were an unwed mother, and she was, I think, property of the state. So when you're an unwed mother, they will make you get rid of your baby. I don't know if that's the case now, but that's what happened. And so she gets older, and her husband had kids, who originally was their first son, Dennis. Puckett was his original last name, but once the Lois Jurgens got her hands on him, it was pretty bad, and it was a big case here in Minnesota. But it had for so many years, they didn't know she had done it or what had happened to him, even though the day that the child had died had ruptured. I don't know if it had ruptured his bowel or kidney or or liver or something, and it's definitely something to look on for. I mean,
Yeah.
the TV movie is called A Child Lost Forever, and you know, they don't show him being abused, but it'll be like behind a door or something, and you can hear Lois beating him and just
Mm.
and I mean, this woman just did the most sadistic things to that child. I mean, it's almost like a child called It in a way, which that
Oh,
book
yeah.
in itself is.
Oh, yeah.
I remember they had us read that in school once, and one of my classmates, she had fainted because of what was going on in there. And
Wow.
of course, she's like, well, I got to go to the nurse's office. I'm not feeling well. Well, one of my other classmates started walking her to there, and all of a sudden you could hear her hit the wall. And then, so then he comes running in like, oh, she fainted. And yeah, it was
Oh,
bad.
yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. I love them Lifetime movies though. The ones that deal
Yeah.
with true stories are so great. But then you
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of
There's that one with, pardon?
it's like you look at it and you're going like, you have the person right there. And my dad always used to tell me, Steven, it's a movie. They got to build up that suspense. And it's like, I know, but he's right there.
That's what I do with horror movies all the time. I'm shouting at the screen.
Oh, yeah. Anytime you want to talk to me about horror movies, I watched my first horror movie when I was 6 years old, but I didn't really have much of a choice in that one. So,
oh, yeah. Me too. Yeah, we did horror movies as a little kid, and oh my gosh, I live for horror movies.
But here's the thing, my dad, who had grown up in the late 50s, he's like, oh yeah, we used to be scared of the Wolfman and Frankenstein and Dracula and Godzilla and all them. And it's like, you watch them and it's like, these weren't scary. And my dad's like, well, you got to think about it. Back in the day, when Godzilla had come out, that was due to radiation fallout from the nuclear testing in the Pacific. So it's just like, wow. And then, of course, YouTube is a great one for true movies. I just watched it a couple years. I think it was last year, called The Day After. And it was about a small town, I think it was either Kentucky or something, that was finding out that World War III was pretty much going to happen. They had said that the Russians were going to launch the nuke, and the way they made this movie, TV movie, so they had to do it, they had to break it up into two parts. And the first part is leading up to what happens, and the second part is the nukes are dropped, and how they did all that was just, it's cool how they had, granted they didn't have much CGI back then, but I mean what they had to work with was really good.
I'm gonna check that out.
If you haven't checked The Day After out on YouTube, oh, it's so good.
I will check that out.
We need movies of the week again.
Yeah. I am. Oh yeah.
Heck, one day my dad's like, hey, Steven, watch this. And I'm watching it, and it was the TV movie they did about Adam Walsh.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, what is this about? And he's like, Adam Walsh. And my parents, I was born in 93, so I wasn't around that time. But in the 90s, they had tried to really institute that don't let your kid out of your sight, and so my parents weren't strict, but like when we went to Sears or something, and I always wanted to know what everything was. I was just that inquisitive of a kid. And my dad once said, "Oh yeah, I remember when we were at Maplewood Mall and you had walked away
Sorry.
from." No, that's fine. You had walked away, or my parents had walked away, and I was looking at video game systems. Well, I was looking for my parents, and thank God, being a little kid, I had the wherewithal to go to the front desk and be like, "Hey, could you help me find my parents?" Well, my mom was not happy, so I got a spanking, and I was like, "But mom, I was just looking at something and turned around and you were gone. You guys didn't even look back to see if I was there." Granted, my dad was watching my older brother too at the time, so it's kind of like, it happens, but thank God I knew where I was taught, if we ever get separated and we're in a public place, go to someone that can get you in contact with us over an intercom and stay there. And
Yeah.
malls even in the 90s were not very safe. I mean, heck, even now today's stuff isn't really safe. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely a weird place in the 90s. And I always said that about the 90s, that people are like, well, with the pandemic and all that was pretty bad. And I do agree with that. But I said, nothing was worse than being a kid in the 90s. Because I mean, you had parents that were either born in the 50s or in the 60s that had dealt with the Manson family, had dealt with the Candyman murders, which was a dad that had poisoned his son.
Oh yeah.
And then you had the Adam Walsh thing. You had the Kent State stuff where the students who were peacefully protesting were shot on campuses. And it's just like, so yeah, by the time of the 90s, my parents are like, yeah, we had seen our fair share. And then, of course, Columbine happens in 99. And then 2001, we had 9/11. And I feel so bad for when me and my wife have kids, because it's just like, they're going to learn some of this stuff in school, and then they're going to come home and be like, well, what was that like for you guys? And it's like, well, I was a first grader when Columbine happened. No, I was a kindergartner when Columbine happened, and I was in third grade when 9/11 happened. But funny story, not that it is funny, but we were watching current events in third grade, and it was on the local news affiliate. Well, what had later happened was they quick turned over to what was going on in New York. The second plane hits the building, and we as kids actually got to see that live on TV. And in my mind, I said terrorist attack. Not knowing what a terrorist attack was, I blurted it out. And so I was brought to the principal's office, a third grader, and they said, well, how do you know that this could have happened? And I'm like, I don't. I'm just saying, it's weird that two planes can crash into two buildings and it be an accident. So it just, yeah, it was definitely an interesting time growing up.
Yeah, see, I'm from the Gen Z. I was in the serial killer age when had the little commercial on TV. Do you know where your children are? So our parents never even knew where we were. So yeah. Yeah, we're of the age of we knew where we were at half the time.
Oh, I always had to tell my parents where I was. And if I was on my way home and the parents of my friends couldn't bring me home and I had to walk home, I had to say I will be home at this time. If I am not home at this time, not to get in a van unless I know the person. And we actually one time had a person that we did know that they were kind of out there. And they had stopped me one time and they're like, hey, I'll go bring you back to your parents' place. And I said, no, it's just a few more feet and I was there. And the person's like, no, I insist. And at first I said, well, I guess, my family knows you, so yeah. But then all of a sudden I was like, wait a second. And I was like, on second thought, it's not that far of a walk. I can make it. I told my parents I'll go right home, and he's like, well, but I got candy back at home for
Oh
you.
my God.
And that's what his line was. I have candy back at home for whatever kid he had stopped. And no one had gotten in. And I was going to be the first one to do it. But I was like, no.
Oh my God.
And then he's like, well, how about just get in and I'll bring you home? And I'm like, no, my brother's right there. Well, when I said that, he took off. And my brother he was born in 88, 89, so he wasn't much older than I was, being born in 93. So as soon as I see my brother riding his bike towards me, I was like, well, there's my brother. And that guy, yeah, he took off. And Keith's like, well, what was that about? And I said, well, he wanted to bring me home, but then he said we could quick stop at his house and I could get some candy and he would bring me right back home. And Keith's like, well, you're smart that you didn't get in. And I told my parents about it. Well, later we had found out that the guy had already moved and that maybe possibly he had come back knowing that he wouldn't have gotten caught with whatever, wanted to try something. And we never ever heard whatever happened to the guy after he moved. But yeah, it's definitely a weird thing.
Oh, wow. It's crazy. That's terrifying. Glad you got through that okay. Man.
Yeah. Yeah. That I wish I could say that was the last time something like that happened, but no. I was at Mall of America. So my parents used to bring us there they brought us there one time. And I was sitting on a bench. People were going by me, so my mom had said, well, me and your dad are going to quick go into this department store. Stay right here. We can still see you. This guy walks right by me and keeps walking, all of a sudden just dead stop. Kind of like how you are in your car when you see something and then it's just dead stop. And he comes by and starts talking to me and says, hey, where are your parents at? And I'm like, well, they're in the department store. And I said my dad's name. I don't know why. I was like, yeah, my dad, Brian Jarvis, is in the department store with my mom. And he's like, oh, I'm a good friend of your dad, Brian Jarvis is. Yeah, he knows me. We went to school. And I mean, the guy was changing his story every frickin' time of how he knew my dad. And I was just like, sorry, sir, I don't want to come with you. I'm good. And he tried to reach out to try. I don't know if he was trying to grab me or touch me or what he was trying to do. But by that time, my dad was walking out. And he turned around and he saw my dad coming. He took off.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was like, that's back in the 90s. We're now Mall of America. The worst thing that can happen to you there, before they installed security detectors and all that, was you would get shot. Because, I mean, Bloomington it isn't a bad area like Minneapolis is, but it's pretty close. And so I told Alyssa one time, I was like, yeah, maybe we don't need to go to Mall of America anymore.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
Well,
my phone's about ready to die, so.
All right. Yeah, I will talk to you later. Go check out Crime Tape.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
TikTok. And do you have anything coming up that you'd like to promote before we go?
Yeah. We have our summer series where we are discussing on child crimes, and so we have that on all podcast streaming areas. And so we just finished our first series where we talk about Alyssa Bustamante and how those type of cases happen and preventable resources and what you might do to be able to protect your child Our next series in that is going to talk about the case of Eric Smith, who recently was paroled after that crime. And again, talking about issues and what you can do to protect your children. And then we are also going to still have a regular podcast talking about unsolved crimes every Monday.
All right. Go check her out on TikTok. That is at Crime Cakes. You won't be disappointed with what you find. Great, intuitive, and she's a great guest. Go check her out. And if you have a podcast, have her a guest on your show. This is Stephen Jarvis.
That's right.
And I will see you all tonight at like 6 p.m. because I got another interview I got to do tonight. Oh, I'm selling myself short. See you later.
All right.